Hello everyone, this is Dr. Al-Sati from Saudi Arabia, and I'll be sharing with you two challenging cases of scleral fixation IOL using the 4 flange technique. The first case is for a lady who came to me 1 year after doing PKP and ACIOL for a complicated cataract surgery. The patient has corneal edema, poor vision, and borderline high IOP. On slit lamp, you will see that she has 6 pointing sutures at least, superficial corneal vascularization, anterior chamber IOL, and corneal edema, and you can see that the cornea is actually decentered. You can see the decentration obviously under the microscope. I have decided to change the graft and put a scleral fixated IOL, but this means I'll be working in an open sky technique. Here are some tips. Using the caliper, I mark the geometric center of the cornea. Then I have to mark the 4 sites of my potential areas for my scleral fixation. I use Mendez gauge and I make my marks on the cornea. Then I take 2.5 millimeter away from the limbus, and I take the same measurement for the 4 points. I like to have the geometric center in the middle of my cross to imagine where my sutures will come. Then I start by doing partial trephination and forming the anterior chamber. And here I have only done 5 millimeter opening that will help me explant the anterior chamber IOL. I then thread in my 5O Prolene or 6O Prolene into a straight 27 gauge needle, and I go through the pre-marked location. The thread is pulled out through the corneal wound and loaded into the micropure 123 inlets of the quadrupode microhaptics. You have to keep your orientation, then put in your second location, but this time you have to bend the needle and load your sutures that are already holding the initial haptics. Maintain the same orientation for your second sutures, but now this time you will go through the inlets before loading the needle. Get a new needle, please, and use the same marks that you have done before. Try to load the suture through the needle externally, which is the easiest way to do this, and take a straight chunk of your Prolene. Don't use a bent chunk of your Prolene sutures, and then pull it out. This is the hardest part. You can then go ahead and perform your open sky penetrating keratoplasty smoothly. I have decided here to do some pupilloplasty and trying to close as much as possible and reduce the glare for the patient. The procedure was not hard, it was easy. You can tell here that it's a little decentered, but when the globe is formed, the centration was perfect. Look to this step as I was doing my second bite and using viscoelastic manipulating the eye and forming the chamber. Suddenly I saw something coming out, and it happened by chance. I wouldn't have noticed it. There was a remaining chunk of cataract or nuclear material in the eye. So do not miss it and look for the remaining lenticular material in chronic corneal edema, especially when it happens 2 to 3 weeks after surgery. The rest of the procedure was quite easy. Cauterizing the flanges is done when the globe is completely formed. I like to do them in radial parts, so you start with the one suture and take the opposing one in front of it. Adjusting the Prolene sutures is quite easy, but keep in mind that the cautery will not work when the media is wet, so keep it dry at all times. By this, the first case is ended. The Canabrava 4-point fixation is quite easy and user-friendly. You can always adjust your fixation point, change it, reposition it, or pull it to another point. Hello everyone, this is Dr. Sahati. I'd like to share with you one of the interesting cases done earlier this year. A 33-year-old male patient underwent uneventful phaco and had a fine vision trifocal IOL inserted. 6 weeks later, he developed this severe capsular phimosis, which was bilateral. The left eye was treated successfully with YAG capsulotomy, but the right eye would not respond to YAG capsulotomy trials. In a minute, you'll be seeing the edge of the lens as the optic is displaced superiorly. So the decision was to go and correct the situation surgically. You can see here the trial of the posterior capsulotomy along with the anterior capsulotomies. Since this was a toric lens, I had to mark my axis first, and I found my 160 degrees. After this, I like always to have my 3, 9, and 6 o'clock marked at all times. Because of the limited pupils dilation, I used the 5 iris hooks to visualize and see what had happened to the haptics of the lens. You can see here with my gentle manipulation that the lens is not shaky, but it is all curved up like a child in a mother's womb. And that's how the 4 haptics were kicked in. I decided to go 1.5 millimeters behind the limbus. This is my at the location of the axis, and then I like to take my marks equal distance right and left to the central one. This is a 27 gauge needle. I'm testing if the 5-O proline would go through in. I did 2 paracenteses, 1 at each side, and I like to mark them so I won't lose them as I'm working. I inserted the 27 gauge needle right under the first haptic, and through the paracentesis, the 5-O proline was inserted, pulled out, and stabilized. Then the second part, this is a continuous suture, so it went under the second haptic, exactly where I have marked my 2 paracentral marks to the desired axis. And I pulled my suture out. The same procedure was done under the inferior or the trailing haptics, and now going through the other paracentesis with a continuous suture. The suture was loaded and explanted, and the same thing was done to the 4th haptic. This technique, as I like to describe, is a hammock technique, or some people call it a belt, but I find hammock as a better description, as it hangs up the 4 haptics. Now, using the cautery, I was able to titrate my desired length, and when I thought it was a little longer, I trimmed it and sutured it again. However, I wasn't really happy about the situation of the haptics, so I had to do some more trimming for the fibrotic anterior capsule, trying to release the haptics and to make sure that they will be stable as I fix my suture cauterization at the end. Now, I wanted to make sure that the Purkinje images are with individual axes, so a little bit of titration more. This is why I like the Proline more than the Gore-Tex, where you can do this little titration smoothly. And that's it. The patient ended up with 610 vision and quite happy. Thank you for watching.